Irelia has been one of the most popular decks since its release in Spiritforged. It has found a decent amount of success, consistently having deep runs in regional qualifiers, and even winning one in Sydney thanks to Rico. This is a deck that has been consistently putting up results, but many players are calling it nearly unplayable in the current meta, thanks to an overrepresentation of Master Yi, which many players consider to be a terrible matchup for the deck. But what if I told you that there is an answer to Master Yi, and that the matchup isn't as bad as you might think? As Aurelia lists have adapted over time, they have become much stronger in this matchup and have been able to find stable footing. Recently, my practice partner, Caravaggio, took Irelia to the regional qualifier in Hartford and placed 10th, all while not dropping a single series to Master Yi. Today I want to take a look at Irelia and teach you how to play it so that you can win your locals and beat up these pesky Master Yi players. There are many different variants of Irelia. The one that you're likely most familiar with is the one that focuses on Irelia and Stellarcorn Herder, and occasionally will run one copy of Adaptatron. Recently, the minion-based list, popularized by Goobums, has seen an uptick in popularity as well. Our list, on the other hand, is a bit more reminiscent of the Irelia lists towards the end of the Spiritforged meta. The notable big differences here are the 3 copies of Find Your Center, as well as the 1 copy of Mindsplitter. The reasoning behind this is that Find Your Center drastically helps your going second game, which is typically a pretty hefty disadvantage in Riftbound. Additionally, when your opponent is ahead on points, it acts as a powerful comeback mechanic on your Abandoned Hall game, giving you access to card draw that also buffs your Aurelia for an additional 2 might. This does mean that you'll need to be patient at times and allow your opponent to reach 5 points, but the payoff can be massive. Mindsplitter, on the other hand, serves a similar role to Adaptatron in the sense that it is a tech card, but one that is never truly dead in any matchup. Against decks that run a lot of removal, or combat tricks, having the ability to remove key cards from their hand while granting yourself perfect hand information can be invaluable. This can lead to a drastic change in the outcome of the game. Additionally, against decks with access to large amounts of removal, Aurelia dying is a very real possibility, and Mindsplitter gives us access to a secondary carry where needed. Mindsplitter is one of the more cuttable cards in the deck, so if your local meta is entirely composed of Aurora players, you should consider replacing it with Adaptatron, otherwise we would suggest trying it before denying it. Irelia is a deck that can win nearly any combat against nearly any board. Thanks to its chosen champion, Irelia Fervent, your opponent's boards have to get incredibly out of hand in order for you to not be able to win a pure might fight. Additionally, large boards comprised of small units can be cleared in multiple swings thanks to Guardian Angel. Irelia also has access to one of the best cycle tools in the game with Stellarcorn Herder. Your game plan will change depending on what hands you draw in the early game, and every matchup is a little bit different, but let's go over your general game plan with this deck. As soon as the game begins, you'll be presented with 2 major decisions: your battlefields and your mulligan. For battlefields, they're pretty simple. Game 1, you're going to use Abandoned Hall. Going first, you'll play Targon's Peak, and going second, you'll choose Sunken Temple. Abandoned Hall is just your best battlefield and can be very flexible, providing mass value to you regardless of whether you're first or second. Targon's gets the most value when you're going first, as you'll have the option to conquer it before your opponent, and Sunken Temple is the least offensive of the battlefields, and also benefits from the extra room that you're going to have access to. Additionally, when going second, it is more common to rely on Irelia Fervent opposed to Stellarcorn, meaning you'll be making use of this battlefield more than normal. Your battlefield order will change slightly in some matchups, such as against Aurora decks, where you'll put Targon's Peak going second, as you'll need the additional runes far more in this game to hold up energy for things like Flash or Starcrossed. They also will get value out of Sunken Temple more than other decks, and this is less true when you're going first and you are applying drastically more pressure onto them. The other key difference in your battlefield queue order is when you're against Diana, where you'll typically lead with Sunken Temple in game 1, as you want to try to get as many Abandoned Hall games as possible. Diana typically leads with Abandoned Hall, and you make far better use of this battlefield than they do, so trying to get 2 games with it will help you stabilize this matchup quite heavily. If your opponent is aware of this though, they might try to mind game you, which makes it a bit more difficult to pull off, so don't explain this thought process to your opponents. As for mulligans, there is a ton that we could say for each and every matchup, but to keep it simple and more digestible, when going first, look for Stellarcorn Herder, a 2-drop, Defiant Dance, Defy, depending on the matchup, and your 2-mana gear if you're assuming your opponent is not running Gear Hate. Things will change depending on the matchup quite heavily though, as for example, Defiant Dance is pretty bad against Aurora in the early stages of the game, but pretty amazing against any combat deck. When going second, Find Your Center will always be the best card and you should always keep it as your turn 1 play. Other than this, look for Defy, a single 2-drop, Stellarcorn, buffs, and specifically boosts of swiftness if there's no gear removal. Stellacorn remains a powerful tool, but is typically worse when going second, as we are often going to be playing around Irelia instead. That is not to say that it is a bad card though, as infinite card draw still remains infinite card draw. Your early turns will be fairly similar in most matchups, but it's important to know how to play out each hand when presented with multiple different options. Your first turn will usually be spent developing a 2-drop, or playing a gear, unless you're going second with the option to play Find Your Center, in which case you should always just play Find Your Center. This is one of the highest win rate cards when played on the first turn of the game, so always prioritize it where possible. A 2-drop should take priority over a gear almost always. Spending mana on a gear can be pretty bad unless there's no other choice due to how many decks are main decking gear hate currently, such as Auction or Turn to Dust. In these matchups, you want to get value out of the gear the turn that they're played. Usually if you're presented with the choice of playing either Scuttle Crab or Tide Turner, the Crab will be better as it draws a card and replaces itself, but there are cases where you'd rather have the 2 might from the Tide Turner. Some of the situations where this might be true are against decks like LeBlanc, where you need to contest their small units on a battlefield due to them not really having buffs in their deck, or if you think that you might need to contest a slightly larger unit on your Targon's Peak game, because holding up the extra energy can be game-changing against decks such as Master Yi. On the second turn of the game, you'll be presented with the option of developing your carry unit. It can be tempting to slam them down as soon as possible, but it is important to be aware of what your opponent can do in response. Against decks that will struggle to clear your carry in base, such as LeBlanc, this can be fine, as you don't really need the extra runes to protect it. But against any deck that has access to your base, you might be condemning your unit to its death, and as such, it would be better to wait a turn for when you can hold up combat tricks or counterspells. It can be okay to take this risk, particularly with Stellacorn, if you find that you might have multiple in hand, because losing one won't be such a big deal. After you've decided on what units to develop when, the next big question for the early game is, should I conquer? Many players will think that trading a small unit for a point is always right, especially when it's just a Scuttle Crab. But there's a lot more nuance to this. For example, going from 0 to 1 point is almost never worth losing a unit for, especially if you're against Call Weak decks. If you expect your unit to be able to hold for a turn and then retreat, such as when your opponent misses their turn 1 play, then conquering and holding to 2 while being able to retreat on the next turn can be a pretty significant swing. It is also important to consider what your opponent will need to do to conquer. If their unit is smaller than yours, they'll need to invest at least 1 additional card until the combat, more if you have access to buffs of your own. This can make the trade a pretty favorable outcome for you overall, even if you still lose the combat. There are many different iterations of this, and figuring out when you can and can't conquer is a crucial skill in Riftbound. So think about what you and your opponent have access to, try new things, and make a mental note of what works and what doesn't. Turn 3 is where you will most consistently develop Aurelia, as you'll have access to more runes to protect it. Occasionally, you'll wait till turn 4, but you'll need a pretty good reason to do this, and a plan to mount your comeback, as your opponent will likely have a pretty significant lead by this point. Once your carry has been safely developed, you're on the way to the mid-game. All that is left is protecting your carry. There are many ways to do this, but the most common will be with buffs, Defy or Guardian Angel. Depending on the game state, sometimes you will conquer with a Scuttle Crab, hide as Zanyas, and then when the crab dies, flip the Zanyas in response to the crab's death knell. This will give you a window to keep the Hourglass in base, protecting your carry while also developing it for 1 power instead of 2 energy. From here, you'll be transitioning into the mid-game. This is the most complicated part of the Aurelia game plan, but I'm going to go over the most important parts briefly. If you are interested in learning more about the mid-game, as well as Aurelia as a whole, my practice group and I have recently released a very extensive guide on our Metafy. The guide is over 40,000 words on Irelia, but also offers a lot of good information on Riftbound in general. It's currently $20, but I've convinced my group to let me give out 25 free copies to my YouTube viewers. The first 25 people to use code FYCYouTube will get the whole guide for free. All we ask for in return is that you leave an honest review after reading it, whether you love it or you hate it. The mid-game in Riftbound can be quite complicated, especially with a deck with as many decisions as Aurelia. Typically, the mid-game is about stabilizing your presence and pushing your lead far enough ahead that you can spend the last turn or 2 of the game closing it out. Or, if your opponent is ahead, the mid-game focuses on closing this gap while preventing them from snowballing too far ahead. With Aurelia, these points are all still true, but how you accomplish them will change depending on which carry you are focusing on. Aurelia games will play out differently than Stellacorn games, and it's important to recognize how and why. At their core, Aurelia games are quite simple. You want to leverage Aurelia Fervent's extra might gain from choosing her to generate a lead by using less cards than your opponent does. Often they will need to go 2 to 1 with you on any buffs that you play, due to yours representing more of a swing. Take Discipline, for example. Traditionally, the card will grant 2 might to a unit, as well as drawing a card, but for Aurelia, it represents 3 to 4 might, depending on if you ready her or not. This is also true for Abandoned Hall games, where your opponent is getting 1 less might than you per spell played, assuming you're buffing Aurelia. No board is truly safe against Irelia, forcing your opponent to decide on how much might they can realistically leave behind on the battlefield to still represent a threat to you, but also while not risking too many units at one time. Irelia also has a relatively easy time getting to both battlefields in one turn, and in most cases, your job is to score both of these battlefields while ending up in base at the end of your turn. Remember that your deck is not a holding one, and Aurelia shines on attack. This is especially true in the Find Your Center list. It is important to exercise patience and not swing in before you are forced to. That isn't to say that you will never hold though, as sometimes you will be forced to play on the defensive. Often, players with Aurelia will aggressively fight combats that they aren't prepared for, making the game much more difficult than needed. It's important to remember that it does not matter whether you win 8-0 or 8-7, as long as you win. When facing decks that are prioritizing killing your Aurelia, it is important to both make their life as difficult as possible and to spend time developing your other units. You'd rather have these developed before you need them, so make sure to invest the time and the resources. Stellacorn games, on the other hand, are quite different. When combined with our buff spells, you will still be able to overpower many boards, but unlike Irelia, your realistic cap for might is much lower. Irelia games are much more practiced and patient, whereas Stellacorn games are more all over the place. While Stellacorn is a lot easier to remove for your opponent, they will still need to invest resources into it, and as Stellacorn will draw us a shit ton of cards, we will likely find any answer that we need for their particular hand. Remember to always say, man, this card is crazy, when you've drawn your third or fourth card in a turn. Opponents love that. Stellacorn shines as your carry in matchups where you need to find specific answers during a game. For example, against Aurora decks, Stellacorn will enable you to look for Star-Crossed as aggressively as possible, or against decks like Victor that try to run you out of units and resources, Stellacorn will shine by refilling your hand consistently. Regardless of your carry, the mid-game will be focused on increasing the amount of points that you have while preventing your opponent from getting too far ahead. Remember that Irelia will typically be more patient and slow, and Stellacorn games will be more fast-paced and balls to the wall. In both circumstances, it is important to find angles that you can exploit against your opponent. This can best be done by imagining how the future turns will play out for both players, and attempting to make your opponent's turns as complicated as possible. Be sure to be mindful of the different removal options each deck has access to, and try to make them as inconvenient as possible. The late game is the last and often simplest part of a Riftbound game. While the combat permutations can be quite complicated, it tends to be pretty clear what the general focus will be. Are they threatening lethal? If so, play for a hold or clear off all of their threats. Are you the one threatening lethal? Develop safely and prepare a large turn that your opponent will not be able to interact with. One of you will get to 6 points first and be the one who's in charge of the late game, and the sooner you recognize who will be in command, the earlier you can prepare for it. A key tool for these late game turns can be to sacrifice your Scuttle Crab for full hand information. If you're the one attacking and you know every card in your opponent's hand, the game moves away from this guessing game and becomes a solvable puzzle. If you're defending, leaving a Scuttle at the battlefield opposite of Aurelia can provide you with the info that you need to navigate the endgame. Remember that if you're holding with Aurelia and it's your opponent's last chance to close out the game, you should use your cards however possible to stay alive. If they have to use all their resources fighting you and lose, you will be able to close out the game with relative ease on the next turn. Identify the key late game turn, and you should have no problem closing out the game. While I won't be covering every Irelia matchup in depth, I wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, or the meditative monk. Master Yi is a bad matchup on stats, and can be quite difficult to play into for Aurelia. Every combat is quite narrow, and if you make a mistake, the game ends relatively instantly. In addition, if you spend too many resources in a single combat, the Yi players will simply save them for the backswing, and you will not be able to prevent them from killing our queen. It is important to note that this is a scary matchup, but that does not mean it is a bad one. The Master Yi player will typically generate a point advantage quite early, and you'll be forced to spend time clawing back while preventing them from closing out the game. Your general game plan in this matchup will focus on developing Aurelia as safely as possible. Master Yi is the best defending deck in the game, but we are the best attacking deck in the game when Aurelia is online. And once she is, there is no board too durable for her to break. Your key focus will be getting through the early turns without investing too many resources, while safely getting Aurelia online. Don't worry about fighting combats early with your smaller units, as the buffs that you will have to spend will be better saved for Aurelia. It is important to note that cards like Charm and Challenge can make it hard to safely set up Aurelia, especially if they combine them with buffs of their own, such as Punch First. But luckily for us, Defy, Defiant Dance, and our arsenal of other buffs can make their lives a hell of a lot more difficult. You also need to be mindful of when you develop your gear in this matchup, as many E players have taken to running Akshan. If you tap out to develop Aurelia while equipping her with a Guardian Angel, you're not actually safe, as Akshan plus Charm or Challenge will spell the end of her short-lived life. Instead, try to get value from your gear on the turn that you use it, such as by using Guardian Angel as a cheap way to ready Irelia for combat, or by allowing her to crash into an enemy board to clear a unit without spending further buffs. For boots of swiftness, try to get value by using it to pump Aurelia up for a fight, and then gank into the other battlefield in the same turn. If these cards allow you to score twice in a turn, or clear an opponent's battlefield, we're not going to be upset when the auction is inevitably top-decked. The last important thing that we briefly mentioned is that you need to navigate combats precisely. You need to win these combats on a knife's edge, coming out ahead by 1 or 2 might. If you are investing more cards than needed, you will lack the resources for future fights. Finally, remain aware of Rengar Trophy Hunter, as it will turn your Scuttle Crab into a free point for your opponent more often than not. If your opponent passes with 5 runes up and leaves the battlefield open, you often can simply just not score and let them waste the energy that they have carefully saved. The final thing that I want to touch on is our sideboard. Things here are relatively straightforward, but the cards that we chose to include are Vex Apathetic, 2 copies of Gust, Hard Bargain, Star-Crossed, Flash, and 2 Adaptatrons. To very quickly go over them, Vex is the most versatile card in the sideboard, and originally was in our main list. She's exceptional against decks like LeBlanc, or ones that run multiple copies of Sprite Token, such as Lilia. It also finds its way into our list quite a bit going first, simply because it fits the 2-4-6 curve. Gust, on the other hand, is here heavily for the LeBlanc matchup, but also has pretty strong application against decks like Victor or Diana. Many of the earlier Irelia lists ran Gust in the main board, but due to how many matchups it does quite literally nothing in, we decided it was better relegated to the side. Hard Bargain is a card that does best when your opponent is not prepared for it, but will often get stuck in your hand doing nothing as there might not be too many windows to play it. For a while, we ran no Hard Bargain, but due to how important it can be against Azir, we decided to keep a copy on the side. It can also have application in the mirror, or against Master Yi, as well as versus pretty much any blue deck in the game. The third copy of Star-Crossed is due to how impactful the card is in certain matchups, such as anything that runs Elder Dragon, LeBlanc, or Diana. It's hard to justify running the third in main due to green decks defying it and ruining our lives, but the card is quite good. The second copy of Flash is mostly for your going first game on Targon's Peak. Here it gets extra value due to the additional runes that you have access to, and can also just be a pretty good way to dodge cards like Rebuke, Wages of Pain, or Hidden Blade. Additionally, it is pretty good against Aurora due to its interaction with Elder Dragon, allowing you to negate the 1 damage pain. Last but not least, Adaptatron makes its way into our sideboard with 2 copies. This is mainly for Aurora, but serves as a carry replacement against other gear decks, such as Azir or Ornn. Remember, just because a deck has some amount of gear, such as Ezreal, does not mean that it is an Adaptatron matchup. Overall, Aurelia can be quite a complicated deck, but there is a pretty serious reward for learning how to play her. The way in which you will navigate combats is quite different than other decks, and will truly reward you for learning when and what to play around. Additionally, the Aurelia Blade Dancer ability is quite versatile, and I would be very surprised to see her completely fall out of the meta in the future, especially with cards like Twilight Shroud entering the game, and possibly giving Aurelia more tools to play with. I hope you enjoyed this deep look into how to play Aurelia. While I went over most of the game plan, I'd like to take this chance to remind you to head on over to metafy.gg/@BQO for a more extensive look into the deck. As mentioned before, the first 25 people to use code FYCYouTube will get the guide for free. There's a wealth of information on there, but if you can't afford it, or simply don't want to buy it, I will happily answer any questions that you have in the comments below. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I have a ton more planned for the Vendetta meta, so be on the lookout for that. Peace out, Cub Scouts.